Hello again and welcome back to our mini-series on MDing in worship. Now, if you haven't checked out the other previous videos, I'd really encourage you to do that just because we're building up from video to video. And in this video, we're going to be talking about what it looks like as an MD and as a worship leader, that communication that happens between us. So I've got my friend Emily here to help us out. So Emily, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about your involvement at worship teams at Birmingham Vineyard?
So hi, I'm Emily and I am one of the worship leaders here at Birmingham Vineyard. I've been playing in various worship contexts with Sam now for about 3 years, whether that's been playing keys in a band he's MD'd in, or most recently, Sam is the MD in the Sunday worship band, which I co-lead.
So Emily is here in this video to talk about the relationship between an MD and a worship leader. And we're going to ask each other a few questions about how it works, what's helpful, what's not helpful, and what our experiences are. So in a couple of sentences, why is an MD important for the worship leader?
So yeah, just quickly, an MD is super important because it frees us up as worship leaders to be able to listen to what God's saying and what God's doing in the room, and to focus on that and lead the congregation into a place of encounter. A good MD has leadership over the music, knowing where things are going to go. They can bounce ideas around with the worship leader and the band and read where the worship leader is going to go and communicate that efficiently with the rest of the band. So with the trust and communication that's built up between a worship leader and an MD, it just means that the focus can be on God, and that's the main thing, and that's what matters.
So what is communication like with an MD as a worship leader?
So communication is key. Communication is the key. Communicating beforehand and communicating during. I think you'll talk about what it's like a bit later from your point of view as an MD. So I'll just stick to what I know and talk about from my point of view as a worship leader. I think it's really important to treat your MD like you would treat a co-lead, so as if they were on the journey of creating the set with you guys. So talking about the set and seeing where it's going, where you're envisaging there to be space, where you're going to build up, hold back, what instruments are going to be playing where and who you'd like to shine where. It's really important to communicate all that with your MD. Don't just expect it's something that they'll pick up at practice through like glare or garbled communication halfway through a song, because that's just not going to work. So communicate it beforehand. And don't just expect that it's the MD's responsibility either to ask those questions. You're part of a team, it's a team thing, so, and you're helping each other to do the best job you can to glorify God in the best way possible. So yeah, it's that dual responsibility. When I do it well, I would message the MD the set after I've planned it, going through song by song, how we're planning to do it, whether it deviates from the original that they'll be putting on their playlist, what percentages we'll be playing out and where, and the key one also, where we might go into spontaneous worship, because that's where the MD will have to watch me more and how I'll signal those moments and all that. When I don't do this so well, or I let myself be too busy to take 5 minutes to do it, I do notice a difference. So it's not that you or any other MD gets worse as an MD, but I haven't given you all the tools you need in your toolkit to be the best MD that you can be. So I can't expect that everything's just going to be called at the right time and the band's just going to follow. They might be doing this, that and the other, because I haven't communicated that beforehand. And when I started leading worship, I wasn't so good with it. And the band just kind of had to guess what I was doing and what I was signalling, and that is never a good way to lead a band, expecting them to just follow along. It's not really like being a team player, enabling us to collectively take the congregation where God is leading. And it can end up being a shambles and distract the congregation from the main thing, which is Jesus, and that's a real shame. So communicating beforehand, communicating during, they're really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how do you see it, Sam, from your point of view?
So the first thing I try and think about when I'm kind of think about communication with a worship leader is, what can I do best as the MD to serve the worship leader? And actually, I find this varies from one worship leader to the next, and it's absolutely key to try and figure out that dynamic between the MD and the worship leader. Some worship leaders will have loads of musical ideas in terms of chords to go through between songs or dynamic changes and arrangements and all these things, and we'll look to the MD just almost to check the ideas and communicate them with the rest of the band so they're carried out well. Whereas other worship leaders will maybe have less musical ideas and actually look to the MD to come up with more of those musical ideas, look to the MD to come up with the dynamic changes, the arrangements and all these things to match their kind of vision for the journey. And so maybe as a worship leader, as an MD, I have a conversation with the worship leader asking them about their expectations, maybe exactly what they are expecting from me and what they are, what sort of level of responsibility they want me to have over the musicality of it. And while the conversation is very helpful, I do often find that in reality, a lot of that dynamic has to be just figured out. And actually, it's just over a process of time and getting to know a worship leader that I go, okay, that worked. That way of doing things worked really well last time. And that way, not so much. But yeah, it does take some time and best felt out. And I always try and keep in mind the worship leader brings most of the direction, if that makes sense. The MD brings a lot of the musical direction. And so once I've established kind of that relationship, I'll ask them other questions, such as, do they have any particular hand signals for like structure or even chords, and how do they like being questions asked mid-set? And I know that you talk about that in a bit, so I won't go too into it. But also, it's key to be always listening to their instrument if they're playing one, because you can often hear, for example, if somebody's building with an acoustic guitar, you can tell as the MD that actually they want to build the song up, and all I have to do as the MD is go, oh, they want to build, and then communicate with the rest of the band. It's nice and easy. And also watching their body language can be really helpful. You have a quite almost iconic by this point example where you stomp your feet when you want to build, and that's just kind of part of the way you lead worship. And kind of as an MD, I kind of just tag on to that and communicate with the rest of the band, which is super, super helpful. So that's kind of how I think about it, kind of serving the worship leader being my kind of number one top priority for sure.
That's really great. That's really, really great.
So as a final question, what 3 things are especially helpful for you as a worship leader from an MD?
So yeah, that's a really great question. I'd say number 1 is that the MD watches you all the time, as much as they can. I know that sounds like really obvious to say, but it is really helpful when you're trying to communicate to the band and the MD actually just does that and they notice what you're subtly communicating. And if the MD isn't watching, that can get really frustrating because they might miss what you're trying to say and you're not moving as one band. Somebody might be building up, somebody's coming down, somebody's playing chorus, someone's playing bridge, it's just a mess. So yeah, that's number 1, watch your worship leader so that you can serve the rest of the team in the best way. Number 2, I would say, is be almost premature with calls. Mm-hmm. So not in like a confusing way where you've done it like a verse ahead or something, but maybe just a couple of bars early enough so that the band doesn't just have a beat to adjust to what's happening. And that allows me as a worship leader to rest back and just do my job, just listen to God and where he's leading and not have to focus on signalling massively to the rest of the band because the MD's got that. Trusting the MD is super important because it just makes it, so make it super easy for your worship leader to trust you. Yeah. That's number 2, be premature with calls. And then for number 3, I would say, as you alluded to before, ask questions. So ask them nice and early, ask simple questions that just require a yes or no answer, like building up, repeat, bridge 2 chords yet? Yes or no? And these simple questions, the worship leader can easily answer with just a subtle nod or shake of the head. There's no other communication necessary. It's not distracting. Also don't just presume you know where the worship leader is going. Obviously there's then the communication beforehand, which gets stuck to most of the time. But sometimes, even if they've communicated the plan, God might have other plans. And so absolutely. These questions really help just to make sure that everyone is still on the same page. And also sometimes as a worship leader, we forget to communicate. We're in a moment and we're leading, and it's really helpful if the MD asks us a question because we're like, oh yeah, there's other people that need to come along. And that just that helps us remember that we need to communicate too. So yeah, the third one I'd say is ask questions.
That's so awesome, Em. There's some really good insight there into how as MDs we can best serve you guys as worship leaders, thinking about how we can best communicate and what things you find most helpful as a worship leader. So yeah, thank you very much. So in the next video, we'll be having a quick look at preparation before practice and before Sunday. So I'll see you there.